as much a mystery as it is a post-apocalyptic tale. And Mandel is especially good at planting clues and raising the kind of thoughts, thickening questions, and keep the reader turning pages from New York Times. Some people say the modern world is built upon technology, and some say it's built upon concrete. But all in all, it's built upon the human race. If one day 99% of the population disappeared, things like tap water, gasoline, electricity, the internet that are taken granted today will become unreachable privileges. And what is left for a civilization? Will humanity and intellect survive? The book Station 11 tries to answer this insightful hypothesis. On a snowy night, an actor died on the stage of the drama King Lear. A few hours later, human civilization fell apart because of a popular leak. 2 decades after the outbreak of flu in Georgia, the Travel Symphony Orchestra toured the end of the world, sending music and Shakespeare plays to survivors scattered throughout the settlement. In the waterside town of Sanderborn, a mad prophet pushed the orchestra to the path of escape. The end of the journey was a civilized museum that was said to have preserved the remains of the old days. Station 11 tells a story of a Hollywood star, his would-be savior, and group of actors traveling the scattered places of the Great Lakes region, risking everything for art and humanity. It strained together two seemingly irrelevant storylines, lead to a simple but worth-thinking problem.
The biggest strength of the book is its ability to intertwine storylines of different people through different periods of time, from 30 years before the pandemic all the way to 20 years after the pandemic. A 50-year span. The story is not written in a chronological sequence. It jumps back and forth in time and switches narrating perspective frequently. The author uses more than 5 characters to tell a story in different parts of the book. This unique way of storytelling does a few things. First, it makes the book more interesting to read because the reader needs to always reorganize the story threads in their head. It keeps them engaged in the book. Second, it makes the storyline more interesting and gives readers a surprise. For example, Jeevan first appears as a King Lear audience who tries to save Arthur. But later in the book, he's the paparazzi who takes shots of Miranda many years ago. And then he appears again as the interviewer of Arthur in the time between the previous events. It would be less dramatic if Jeevan appears as a paparazzi first, and everything just happens chronologically. Second, the author manipulates motifs like snow, paperweights, electronics throughout the novel to tie characters together and dramatize the story. For instance, the paperweight is used to amplify connection between characters. It's first purchased by Clark, who gives it to Arthur at a dinner party. Then Miranda took it away as a revenge for being cheated on. She holds it for years, but returns it to Arthur before the pandemic. Arthur gives it to Tanya, and Tanya eventually hands it to Kirsten to distract her from Arthur's sudden death. The paperweight is a symbol of these human connections and adds complexity to the plot.
There are a few major weaknesses in Station 11, but overall, the book is not greatly affected by them. And these weaknesses are sort of nitpicky and not that necessary. Not everything in this book is scientifically realistic. There's no way that 99% of the world's population could actually get wiped out by one virus. Because of this, a pandemic as bad as the one that takes place in Station 11 is not that realistic. The Black Death wiped out anywhere from 75 to 200 million people, which, if it was closer to 200 million, means that roughly 50% of the world's population was killed off at that time. Today, there are about 35 times as many people as there were during the Black Death, which means that some type of virus would have to kill roughly 3.5 billion people just to kill half of the population of Earth. And remember that the Black Death was the biggest single thing that killed the most people in history. Another weakness is that something that was mentioned by Sigrid Nunez from the New York Times, and she said that there wasn't a lot of emotion or depth in most of the situations. She says that there was never a time in the book that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up or made her cry. However, this could be a strength because the point of her book is not to take us on an epic, action-packed adventure. It's supposed to make us think about the things we value the most.
People never felt satisfaction about their life until the day they lost it. Our world now works in a very stable situation. There's no war, there's no little disease that's scattering in a large area. Electricity technology improves and applies to a successful process. The diversity of jobs keep our world operating, keep us alive. We somehow think all of this is what we deserved. The numbness attenuates our realization of the beautiful things on this world. Everyone in the post-collapse world had lost someone. Most of them lost entire families, friends, and lovers. But still, somehow, art persists. Stories, drawings, music, and even Shakespearean language. What was lost in the collapse? Almost everything, almost everyone. But there is still such beauty. Mendel reminds reader to be grateful for all we possess and warns us how fragile this seemingly impervious technology, driven light, actually is. And even among this condition of despair, Mendel shows us that there is still hope for humanity, and survival is insufficient.
How is nature portrayed in the book? Is this consistent with what you would expect?
I think it's sort of consistent with what I would expect. After something like that, it's obvious that a lot of plants would overgrow the city and everything, and all that would happen. But I don't think that like global warming would just like stop and start reversing right away, because all of the pollution that's in the air doesn't just disappear once you stop making it. It's still there.
Right.
So the earth would keep heating up. So I don't think that that part of the book was very accurate, but I do think that there's a lot of parts in it that are correct.
So, we mentioned about the prophets in the season 11 before, and I just want to ask, are people like the prophets believable? Is it plausible that he is the only kind of Christian they met?
I think it's definitely possible that people like the prophet will be in a post-pandemic world like that. Many people will create cults or be in a cult. But there will definitely be some true Christians still. Because even though many Christians will lose hope after this devastating disaster, some will still remain as Christians.
So, does the Museum of Civilization represent what is best about civilization? And what does it consist mostly of, and what's missing?
Maybe, I think, because in the Museum of Civilization had been told in the very beginning of the story, and it is like a light that guide and encourage the symphony and other people to keep going to it.